We've got a good mix of people, so that's great. That helps me kind of tailor what I will say based on some of the NCAA rules and what will apply to the kids your age, or ages, I suppose, because there are multiple. All right, well, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Why not? All right, so I'm going to share here. All right, and I'm going to present. Okay. All right, so thank you for joining today in this webinar, and thank you for your time. My name is Katie Miles, and I am a college golf recruiting consultant. Formerly, I am a college golfer. I was a college golfer. I coached for 11 years. I coached at both Indiana University, so I've got some people in the Midwest on this call, so that's great. I spent a lot of time driving around your states. I was an assistant coach at Indiana, and then I was the head coach at Georgetown for 6 years. We moved back to the West Coast, which is where I'm originally from, in 2017, which is when I launched my company. My husband got a job in the Seattle area, and I'm also from Washington. So we moved to Seattle, and then we lived in California for a few years. And then we recently moved back to Seattle. So I have my doctorate in human performance, which is another thing that I sort of speak from that lens, especially when talking to clients and parents about the recruiting process. So I also, I've helped almost 120 students at this point with college recruiting and placing them on teams. The highest amount of scholarships one of my students received was 27 scholarships. I really enjoy helping people, which is why I do free webinars. Obviously, there's a lot that I don't do in my free webinars, but I do just generally think that there's a lack of good information out there, and so I'm happy to share it. I have, like I said, I've placed some students kind of all over the country, and we'll talk about some of the different levels that I have students playing. But here's kind of just a short list of some of the places where a number of my students are playing college golf. I am also a former junior golfer, so I understand the stress and the pressures that you are dealing with. I understand that. And then I can't quite relate to the parents, but I hopefully will one day be able to relate to the parent stress of all of this, as I have just a little bit over 1-year-old daughter. So hopefully she'll play golf. Who knows? I'm actually going to stop sharing this just to make sure that you can all see me and everything is going well, and I can't see the chat from my desktop. Let's see. Someone asked about the recording. Is everything going well? Can somebody at least in the chat just say, like, yes, we can see the presentation? Okay, perfect. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, everybody. Okay, great. We're going back. All right. And yes, I will share this too, just so you know. Okay. Let's see. Here we go. Present share. Okay. You guys should be able to see this. Yes. Okay. All right. So, hold on a sec. All right. Okay. To give you a little bit of an overview, I'm going to start with kind of some basic things and a few myths to start, because a lot of the myths are very prominent in the junior golf space. So I wanted to kind of address some of those, and then I'll talk about some of the other different things that are here on this list. As I said, I'm going to start with some myths. So first myth, if you're really good, coaches will find you. All you need to do is play good golf. A lot of people think that. And that's true for the very, very small minority of players. And I'm talking like maybe the top 50 in each class, maybe even less than that, maybe fewer than that, because I've actually had a number of students that are ranked in that top 50 number in their class. And if you're not reaching out to coaches, a lot of the time it's very simple. A coach might just assume, hey, you're not interested in my program, or you're already committed somewhere. So even for like the best players, if you're not reaching out to coaches and being proactive, then there's a likelihood that they would probably just not even know that you exist. Another myth that I hear a lot is that I want a full ride. A lot of college golf programs have a lot of money, and I'll be able to get a really, really big scholarship. Okay. We'll talk about scholarship allotments here in a second, but you will learn that, especially on the men's side, having some scholarship is actually a really big deal. And we're going to talk about why that is the case with just overall numbers and allotments. Division I golf is the only route for me. Obviously, this presentation talks about Division I, II, and III. We're going to touch on just some of the other options too, but hopefully from this presentation, one of the things that you'll learn is that there are a number of different paths, and hopefully you will maybe find a path that really fits for you, and that's kind of the name of the game. Another myth is I'll just hire a cheap recruiting service. That's a great way for coaches to learn about me. A lot of the time when I was a coach and I would get either emails or a lot of the time faxes from college recruiting services, it was really only like 1 in 20 kids had like the academic or golf standards that I was looking for. So it felt like a very lazy and not appropriate way to contact coaches. So just be very mindful of probably different services that are calling you a lot and buying different email lists. So you're probably hearing from them very often. Okay, so I actually did a number of myths, and it got to a point where I had coaches recommending different, like coming to me with like even different emails and like different myths and things that they had thought of over the years. So I do have these on my Instagram page. It's kind of been it's been a while ago. I even have my like old logo on there, but they're down there, and there are some other myths that if you ever wanted to read them, or maybe you were thinking like, I'm not sure if this is true or not. I did 18 because there are 18 holes of golf. So maybe you might have a myth on there. You might have a myth. And if you have a myth that I haven't thought of, please message me, because there are a lot of them out there. And there are a lot of junior golf parents that might give you some advice based on their specific scenario, but it probably doesn't apply to you. So that's kind of one thing that I always like to be sort of just be aware of as you are kind of navigating this process. I know a lot of you have kids who are significantly younger, so you'll be doing this for many years to come. Just be really leery of why a parent or maybe a family is trying to like convince you to do something. It could be to maybe validate why they did something. So just be really kind of aware of some of the different people who you'll meet along the way. And some are genuinely trying to help, and some might have gone through the recruiting process and it was very easy for them. So, it's like they love to talk about it, but a lot of the time, your scenario will probably be different. So let's talk about Division I, II, and III. So the NCAA is headquartered in Indianapolis, Indiana. So for some of you in the Midwest, not far away, and maybe even been to their headquarters. So they govern, so they've got the governing body for all of NCAA college sports. So that's Division I, II, and III. So there's always going to be an NCAA staff that would be present at championships. And they are going to be making sure that all of the students that are playing NCAA sports at all levels are eligible to play. So there's an eligibility center that you have to sign up for, and all of your kids would need to register for if they're playing Division I, II, or III golf, or other sports. I know you might have kids who are playing other sports. So when I was in high school, I remember thinking like, oh, I don't need to do that, whatever, like that'll just, I don't know what I thought, actually. I was a teenager, but it's kind of like a driver's license. Like you can't actually drive on the roads legally without getting a driver's license and like taking a test. And it's kind of the same type of thing. Just to sort of put it out there also, there are other governing bodies for the NAIA and the NGCAA. So those are two other completely separate entities that have their own championships, have their own rules, things like that. So like I said, we're not talking too much about those today, but I do have students that play in both the NGCAA as well as the NAIA. So I always talk about it being the right fit for each student. So there are going to be different schools and maybe different situations where those types of schools would be the best fit. And in fact, you can get a great education at some of those schools too. This is kind of the time of year too, the springtime, especially for seniors. Every year I'll have a few students who maybe want to go through the college admissions process that's going to be sort of like independent of their college golf recruiting. They might have like a dream school that's like an Ivy League or something like that, where they maybe can't play there, but they want to go through the admissions process. And this time of year is when students are either getting in, or they're on a wait list, or they're kind of figuring out where they're going to go. And this is also a time when club golf becomes a real viable option for some students. As well as like for those juniors maybe who are kind of like, wow, like I could have an internship this summer. I don't really know if college golf is going to be part of my future. That's where I recommend club golf. And there are a lot of college teams that have there are a lot of colleges that have club teams, and in fact some schools have so many participants that they even have two different teams entirely. So that would be something to investigate. I'm actually doing a webinar for them later tonight, so I'm a really big fan of what they have to offer. And they also are sort of in conjunction with the National High School Golf Association, and the big tournament in Pinehurst. Some of your sons and daughters might have or will be playing in it this year. So I talked about scholarship allotments. So as you can see, in men's golf, there are 4.5 scholarships for Division I, 3.6 for Division II, and then on the women's side, 6, 5.4, Division I and II. And then at NAIA and then NGCAA, both men and women, you have 5 and 8. Okay, so you'll see Division III doesn't have any scholarship money for sports. However, a large portion of students who are attending Division III schools do end up signing or do end up getting a significant amount of financial aid. So I'll share a little bit more about that here in a second. So scholarships kind of can consist of some of those things listed there. To give you somewhat of an overview of the rules, a date that's really important that a lot of you who have 2024s might find to be very important, and something that you're talking about a lot lately, is June 15th. So that is coming up. June 15th is the first date that Division I and II coaches can proactively reach out or contact your son or daughter. So there are ways that they can sort of passively recruit them right now, but that June 15th date is a really big deal, and it's coming up. What I also like to say is that coaches, you might end up going somewhere that, you might end up ultimately committing somewhere that didn't reach out to you on June 15th. So it's an important date, but it's also not, something that's like going to make or break your college recruitment. I also like to say that if you are a 2024 and you are hoping to have a good June 15th, then you should be proactive about reaching out to colleges now. And then as you can see, Division III coaches don't have these same rules, so they can reach out to you at any time. There's no age limit there. And just so, like I said, can't see the chat here. So if there's ever any questions, we'll talk about those here at the end. Generically, sort of Division I, II, and III have a few sort of size limitations. and I'm going to actually just flip to the next slide because the NCAA doesn't have this on their website anymore. And I'm so glad I took it back when I did in 2018. They have a more updated Division 1, 2, and 3 facts that's a little different, obviously based on numbers. But this one has like a lot more information, and I really like it because it talks about some of the sort of things to expect at each level. You're talking about size, you're talking about percentage of the student body that are athletes. I think that's one of the most interesting things. So at the very bottom, one up from the very bottom, you see the average percentage of the student body that participates in sports. So that's college athletes. The Division I level, only 4% of students are athletes. So that's crazy to think about. Like, you have that many students on campus who are not having your same experience, because being a student athlete is a really big deal and it's a lot of your time. So you compare that to 9% at the Division II level and then 26% at the Division III level. So you have a lot more students, especially proportional to the student body and like kids you're in class with, and maybe kids in your dorm who are having that same student athlete experience. So that's where I think Division III is really unique, and it is ultimately a really good path for a lot of people. So you can also see one thing I mentioned was the financial aid at Division III. There's a large percentage of students that are receiving aid. And again, that's not athletic scholarships. Here's a link that does take you to the NCAA's 3 divisions, and it talks a little more about like eligibility requirements and different things like that. So interestingly, right now we're dealing with the ACT and ACT requirement. The NCAA recommended in their meetings in the early spring that the SAT, ACT requirement would be like forgiven starting in August of this year, and that will I think go into effect in August. So that is kind of in line with a lot of the different universities, and taking away that SAT, ACT requirement for admissions. However, I really try to be careful with this one, because I tell my students that it's if you're not taking SAT or ACT, there might be some schools that would like to see it. Whether or not it's required is a whole other thing. That's where I recommend too that they talk to coaches and try to figure out if it would be a requirement or recommended. And some schools are giving financial aid, and typically when they're offering financial aid, a university would have they'd have like a table of the different levels of financial aid that you're eligible for. And what we're seeing now is if you're not taking an SAT score, a lot of the time it'll be based on your SAT and your GPA in high school. What you're seeing is a lot of the time, if you don't have an SAT score, you're automatically kind of just receiving the bottom amount of aid. So just be really cognizant if you're deciding as a family not to take the SAT or ACT. Just kind of like understand what that would mean at a number of different places where you're intending to go to school. One thing that I like to point out is the different opportunities within Division I, 2, and 3 are very different. So you have sometimes like a large big state school, like Indiana is a good example of that, where I used to work. Within the Indiana University system as a whole, we had over 100,000 at that time. So I don't even know what the number is now. It's got to be a lot more than that. But on campus, we had about 42,000 students at that time. Obviously, it's bigger now. But and then when I worked at Georgetown, we, as an undergraduate population, we had about, I think it was like 12,000 students. So completely different experiences. One is not good or bad or right or wrong, but it's really important as a family and as a junior golfer that you're considering some of these things and really thinking about, okay, like what's the right fit for me? My friend is wanting to go to like this big state school, but is that the experience that I want? Do I want, to be in a class with 300 people where, I will never meet my professor? Is that the type of environment that I want? Some people really want that. Some people don't. Some people want a smaller school. Some people want a bigger school. Totally, it's totally part of finding your fit, which we'll talk a little bit more later. You can see a lot of the options here in Division II. There's a really strong conference in Division II in Florida, the Sunshine State Conference. So a lot of really good options there. And then Division III, there are some really great places where you can get a really good education, as well as have a good balance of being a student and an athlete. So really strong academic schools listed here. Again, I like to sort of harp on the fact that it's not like Division I is the best, then Division II, Division III. We'll talk actually about scoring average is too, so you can kind of see like it's not like the best golfers go Division I and then Division II and then Division III. It's really not like that. It's, again, I talk about finding the right fit a lot, but there are going to be a lot of different places that could be good for you, and ultimately the place that you decide should hopefully fill a number of different criteria for you, and those are some things that you guys should start thinking about even at all the ages that you are now. So let's talk about just sort of like generally some of the things that you would see if you are playing different golf at different levels. Okay. So in Division I and Division II, you have 144 countable days. So that is 144 days of your season. And you have to have 1 day off per week. A coach always has to give you 1 day off per week. And your conference championship and then the postseason doesn't count. So that's a lot of days. And typically in a college Division I golf season, that starts pretty much right when you get to campus at the end of August. And that typically goes through late October, early November, where you're in season and you have practice and you have, lots of different hours that you're required to be on, in all of the different required things that your coach is making you do. And then again, for Division I, you're going to count back those days that you had from the fall. And then let's just say you had like 60 days in the fall, then you'd start with that last practice day, and then you'd count back. So typically starts in like early February, sometimes even late January for some programs. So Division III is going to have 19 weeks, so 114 days. So shorter seasons, which typically you see typically ending like mid-October and then starting later in the spring. So for some people, especially those who want to maybe major in something hard or really want to focus on their studies, that's a great balance, because golf is one of the only sports where you have like 2 official seasons. The official season is in spring, where you have your conference championship, like that's your championship season, but everything that happens in the fall also counts. So golf is really hard to manage, and it's pretty much happening all year round. So that's where you sometimes having a balance and maybe having shorter seasons where you have like a lot of really great time to study, as your finals are coming up in the fall, and then have like maybe some few months where you don't have all of the rigors of your season in the early spring to get ahead on your schoolwork. That can be really helpful. So these are some things to think about when looking at sort of finding what that best fit for you would be. And then, of course, there are different conferences that have different restrictions. So when I was in the Big Ten, we had different like class day, missed class day requirements. So we had certain things that we couldn't miss. So there are going to be different things that are present at each school, and then sometimes different conferences have their own restrictions. So those are things that you would learn about as you get like farther into the recruiting process, and maybe when you're like visiting campuses and talking to coaches. So I mentioned, on that last slide, and I did not talk about it yet, but 20 hours is one of the kind of required amounts of time that coaches can have with you. So 20 hours includes weightlifting and practice and competition. In golf, and this is a real shame, Golf, a 36-hole day where you might be up at 5 a.m. at the breakfast, the hotel breakfast, and like getting to the course, and there's something starting with a 7, and then having a shotgun at 8:30 or so. That only counts as 3 hours, and certain things don't count towards your countable hours. So like flying back and forth from a trip, or driving to a tournament, or having like a compliance meeting, or if a coach is giving you all these voluntary workouts, those do not count in your 20 hours. So there are times, especially if you're including like travel and things like that, there are times at the peak of your season where you might have like 60 to 80 hours of your week and that would be kind of allocated towards your sport and all of the different surrounding activities. So for anybody that's sort of on the fence and maybe wants to major in like engineering or pre-med or something, and you're kind of like, oh, I don't really know if I want to do this, you really have to want to do it, because it is a lot of hours, especially when you are in the peak of your season. That being said, it's totally doable. There are thousands of people that have walked before you, so I'm not trying to change your mind any which way, but I just want people to be aware of the time the time commitment that is required to be a Division 1, 2, or 3, or NAIA or an NCAA athlete. You are doing something that a large percent of the student body is not doing. You're playing a sport. You're representing your university. It's a big deal. So there are more information and like more things that you can read about both the NCAA allotment of 20 hours per week and then the countable athletically related activities. So NCAA scoring averages. Just to give you a little bit of background, during COVID, I had some time on my hands, and this was 2 years ago now. Early March, April, college golf season got canceled. I was actually at a tournament the day before everything shut down, when March Madness shut down. I think we can all think back to that fateful time in March of 2020. But I'm glad I did this because I looked at GolfStat, which is the governing body of stats for college golf. And I found the different teams that were ranked, say, you can see it there, 1, 25, 50, 75, then down the line, all the way to the bottom ranked team. At the time, there were like 299 programs. 5 of them hadn't paid their dues, so they weren't listed. Anyway, you can see the lowest rated team there, and it's the same across the board. I have 6 slides here, but I wanted to look at the scoring averages for each player. So this is, mind you, the top 5 compete and travel, okay? So with certain teams, you had 5 players that were traveling, but also like different players in the lineup like got to play at different times. Okay, so you can see that like there were certain teams that only 7 players maybe played, and nobody else made the lineup. So hopefully these slides, there will be more of them. This is just the men's Division 1, are helpful and help you realize how competitive it is to play Division 1 golf, but how competitive it is to play Division 2 and Division 3 golf, both on the men's and women's sides. And this is where I'm going to go back to what I said earlier of golf in Division 1, 2, and 3 and NCAA opportunities not being linear. You could be a great player and, maybe not be able to play for a program that's ranked like below 200. Okay, you might be shooting like 75 on average. College golf is going to be played on longer courses and usually like sometimes not peak weather months. So what I like to say is like add 2 to 3 to the scores that you're shooting right now to sort of like equate where you are currently to this, and where you would be in college golf. And so another thing about this is college coaches are recruiting players to beat their number 1, 2, and 3 players, not players to be like their number 8 player. Okay, unless there's like an extreme circumstance. Like a few years ago, a player of mine, like her family, knew the head coach really well. The head coach had kind of watched her grow up. she was definitely not going to be one of the top 5 on this program, but she got great grades. She got this like huge scholarship to the school. The family knew the coaching staff and had known them for a long time. That was kind of an extreme circumstance where, you know, she was going to be a good addition. She was a great person. She was wonderful, but she probably wasn't going to make the top 5, and she still hasn't. Hopefully, I ran into their coaches recently. Hopefully, she will in future years. But just kind of know, like, if you're going through the recruiting process, coaches really do want to recruit somebody that's going to come in and make an impact immediately. Transitioning to Division I scores, you can see that there are a lot of players who are very good. You can see that Wake's team that year, 2 years ago, they didn't have anybody travel outside of the top 6. And you see, I put also that number of players on the roster too. I thought that was important. You can see that we have smaller teams on the women's side. Okay, here we have Division II men. We can see that this is still really, really competitive. When we look at Division I and Division II is going to have some lower academic standards a little bit. So sometimes you might have players, particularly international students, who might not maybe meet the exact Division I requirements, but maybe would choose to play Division II. As I said, there's a really solid conference of Division II schools in Florida, and kind of you can see across the board, there's some solid ones in California, kind of along the West Coast too. Texas obviously has some great golf. So you can kind of see scores there. Still very competitive. Same on the women's side, you can see the numbers here. If you're shooting kind of mid 70s, you'd have probably a good opportunity in Division II. And even higher than that, you'd still be able to play Division II golf. And this is where I say that if you really want to dedicate your time to this and you want to do this, college golf can be for you. You absolutely can do this. Division III is, I think, probably one of the more interesting and surprising slides. Okay, so each year I have players who could play Division I golf, but choose to play Division III golf. At a place like, let's just say Emory. That's always a really competitive and like great program. They're ranked, I don't know if they're ranked number 1 this week, but they've been ranked number 1, 2, and 3 throughout the entire season. Okay, on the men's side, they have an opportunity every year to play for a national championship. You can't say that about the number 297th men's Division I ranked school. So there's different opportunities that are available depending on the division that you're intending to play. I did mention Emory men's golf, Emory women's golf. This was the first year that actually they had a program. So their women's team is now ranked in the top, I think, 3 as well. And their scoring averages are significantly lower. So I always like to point that out. But you can see here Division III golf, in terms of scoring averages, if you're shooting, you know, low 70s, you're probably going to be playing at some of the top Division III schools. And some of those schools, especially from an academics perspective, are going to be very competitive and a really a highly sought after place to just go to college in general. So those are like places like Amherst, Williams, Pomona, Claremont, those types of colleges. So I talk about finding the right fit, and I did mention that earlier a few times. I like to think of 3 different areas mainly, and then I have a little bonus round at the end. But I always talk about this, and these are kind of some of the main things that I focus on when I'm talking to my students about setting goals or setting, you know, like target schools. We want to address academics first. Okay. You might break your arm. I know a lot of people think they'll never get injured. And I thought the same thing until I hurt my back my senior year of college. But your academics should be the driving factor, like the number 1 factor, okay? I know that maybe not everybody on the call agrees with me on that, but very important. And I know that we have probably a lot of really successful parents on this call. They understand how important the academics piece is. Athletics is very important, obviously. College golf, especially if it's going to potentially be helping you with admissions, very important piece of this. personal, we'll talk about that a little bit. That's important. And then we'll talk about the last piece. Diving into the academics. Do you want to go to a big school or small school? You know, I kind of explained the situation of like being in a huge lecture hall and like being 300 students and never meeting a coach, or maybe never meeting your professor, but having a TA maybe for your Friday lecture or whatever. Those are types of things that you'd see at a bigger school. I went to a medium-sized school. I played at Notre Dame. I'd say some people, if you're comparing it to like bigger schools, might say it's small. So I still had a few classes like that, but very few. Like I can think of them, very few. There were like more like big science classes, things like that, freshman year. Public versus private, is that important? Is that a piece of the puzzle? State schools right now versus public versus private tuition is a really big deal. You're talking about a swing of like $40,000 to $50,000 in some cases. So that's a huge contributing factor for a lot of families, as it should be. Resources available for research. Do you want to be able to be in a lab and do things like that undergraduates at some places can't do? If that's the case, then you might want to go somewhere smaller. What opportunities do you have for major? What opportunities do you have for minors? What might you be able to do as an internship afterwards? Does your potential future degree that you want to receive, does that matter where you go for your undergraduate degree? And for those of you who aren't considering getting a degree after college, then you don't need to think about that yet, but maybe you do. Maybe this is a good time to start. So the quality of your the quality of the golf program is likely going to dictate whether or not you get a spot on that team. Okay, so we want to be able to match what you're doing versus like where you want to go. So if you're going somewhere and intending to go somewhere that's sort of on the same path and within that target range of schools based on where you are with your golf right now, then that's good. If you're like, no, I want to go to Stanford or bust, and you're not breaking 70 on the boys' side or 80 on the girls' side, then we've got to have a chat. I never heard back from them. That was just something that was just part of my recruiting process. So that whether or not you'll have an opportunity is going to be dependent on like where you are relative to where the team is. Some other contributing factors is scholarship money. Is scholarship money going to be something that you need? What do you want your overall experience to be? When I'm talking to new students, one of the first questions I ask them is, what do you want your college golf experience to look like? So what does that mean? So what does that mean? It means, do you want to just be on a team? Or do you want to be one of the best players on a team that's traveling and getting to compete? Some people don't care. They just want the cool shoes and they want the issue gear and they don't mind about the whole like getting to play type thing. Okay. So you want to actually clarify that. Like, what does that look like for you? What is your best case scenario? And then do you want to play golf at the professional level? Is that important to you? Because if that's important to you, then probably where you go to school matters. So from a personal perspective, I like to sort of explain that the physical location and like where you are in college where you go to college is probably going to determine to a certain extent where you end up. So I went to Notre Dame. A lot of my friends ended up in Chicago in the Midwest. Okay. Obviously that's not a rule. When I coached at Georgetown, a lot of my students ended up in New York. We were the 5th highest feeder to Wall Street when I was at Georgetown. That was one of my big marketing tools when I was recruiting players to come to McDonough School of Business. And in fact, the #1 feeder school in the Silicon Valley, if I could see the chat, I would get into it, but some of you might be surprised to learn that it's actually not Stanford or the school that I'm standing in front of, Santa Clara here. It's San Jose State. By numbers, they are the largest school, largest feeder to Silicon Valley. They have so many kids. So is climate and weather important? Through the years, I've helped some international students who are like, I don't care, I just want to come to America. And I'm like, well, we've got some cold places and you've never seen snow. So we should chat about that. You know, like, are you sure you're okay with that? Like, yeah, I'm like, well, actually, maybe not. Like, yeah, okay. So that like eliminates half of our country for the winter months. So let's just be mindful. Is religious affiliation a contributing factor? For some people, it is. And then, you know, again, what are your career aspirations? Are you hoping to become an engineer? If you're want to become an engineer, then you know there are a lot of schools that don't even have undergrad engineering. You might have a 3-2 program. So if that's the case, that's a very serious contributing factor. So very important to consider. And again, the bonus round. I told you it was coming. I really disagree when I hear from teachers or coaches, like usually like swing coaches, the coach is all that matters. You got to go somewhere where the coach really likes you. And I get where they're going. I think I understand what they're trying to say, but I don't think they really thought through that answer, because a coach could leave, they could get fired. In fact, we're going to see that probably a lot in the next few weeks as seasons are done. Coaches are, a lot of college programs are like having their conference championships like last week, this week, the coming weeks, and their postseason is happening through May. You know, this is the time of year where we have coach turnover. Okay. A coach might want to coach you all 4 years, but they might not have the chance to. So that's important. Your coach might leave. They might become a coach at a bigger program. And you also just want to be around somebody that's a good human being and somebody that like inspires you and is nice and is agreeable and helps you, rather than somebody that's, you know, maybe ruling with an iron fist. And maybe you want that. Then that would be the type of coach that you want to try to go play for. So I want to share really quickly, just if you want to learn more about my programs, I have full-time programs, and then I have a few other like smaller level programs for families and how I help them. At this point, I've helped almost 120 families with the recruiting process. I definitely do not do your recruiting for you. I will not do that. I'll just be very clear. I do not do that. But I help you and I serve as a guide for your family. And as I said, I really enjoy this process. I love doing what I do. And I hope for all of my students that I can help them feel confident, feel more prepared, and feel like they're actually being strategic about the recruiting process, because it can definitely be hard. And I remember going through it myself. It's as a you know, junior golfer, there's so many places that you could play, and it sometimes doesn't feel like you might be looking at the right places, especially if you don't hear back from coaches, and that process can be really frustrating. So I try really hard to just make this process enjoyable. I also have a boot camp coming up too next month. So if anybody is interested in learning more about that, I will send more information, but I actually haven't done this for 2 years. So I'm really excited to be doing it again in May. And when I did this before, I actually had so many people that I ended up having to do 2 cohorts. So it's what I do is we'll have, it's going to be here. We do 2 weeks of programming, and then the following 2 weeks, we have a private check-in. So we'll talk more kind of strategically about your specific recruiting process and where you want to go. So I won't talk too much more about that, but I'm going to unshare and to be able to answer any questions. If you guys have questions, if you want to like ask them privately, feel free. Yes. Anybody? Okay. How would you like us to contact you for a private session? I will be emailing the group And hopefully you all received the Zoom like reminder emails and all of that, but I will send a follow-up email to the group and then you can just respond to that. All right, so I've got some private messages here. Hold on. Ooh, somebody mentioned a specific company, recruiting company. And I'm not going to say the specific company. But some of them can be useful from like an information gathering standpoint. Typically you get assigned somebody that's younger and usually in sales or somebody that kind of like manage your account. A lot of the time they didn't play college golf. They might have played another sport in college. And what I think the biggest challenge is, and this is where I've seen it with my students who have like come from those companies where like maybe their parents bought those different like memberships at a younger point, is that everything lives within their websites. So they're really only as good as like the coaches that memorize their passwords or the coaches that even want to use like a third party to begin with. And that's where I would suggest not having things live on a third party, because there are a lot of coaches that are like, I'm not dealing with that at all. Email me. So that's one challenge, is like, there are going to be times where they'll advertise all the coaches that use it, but it's not coaches that you want to go play for. It might be like colleges that you've never heard of. And so sometimes coaches, like I said, they don't even have their passwords. They don't ever access it. They just don't use it. So that's important. And then a lot of the time the data is trapped in there. So like I've had kids that have wanted to send videos or things like that, but these companies will like stamp their logos on everything. And so then they can't get their video or information, like resumes and things like that. They can't actually like take that information out. It just always lives within the platform. So I think that's just one of the challenges to be aware of. But from an information gathering standpoint, some of them can be helpful there. Yes. Especially if you don't want to do the work of like looking for it yourself. See, if getting an offer from a Division I coach beginning junior year with a 1-week deadline offer. Okay, what's your recommendation on taking it versus waiting for more potential offers during the rest of junior year? Good question. So this person is asking, okay, so this would be probably a pretty good player if they're getting this offer beginning of junior year. So as I said, that June 15th date is following sophomore year. August 1st is the first date that you can go visit campuses. Obviously, you can visit a campus anytime you want, but that college coaches can physically meet you on campus and you could like meet the team. Of course, the team's probably not on campus August 1st, but like later in the month they would be. So this would be probably a pretty good player who's getting an offer early junior year. What my recommendation would be here would be, it depends on if you really want to take it. I always say to my students, especially the ones that are really good, who would be getting offers in that time frame, is if you're feeling pressured and it doesn't feel good, then there's probably a reason for that. And if you're feeling pressured and it almost feels like you'd be missing out if you said no, then you probably need to listen to that too. And there's a really good chance, especially if you're getting an offer that early, that you'd probably get more offers later in the year. But I totally get that feeling of, and I had that happen with a few of my best players in the 2023 class, where they were like, their parents were like, wow, this just feels really soon, but also, like, he's ready. Like, okay, go ahead. It's tough. Many coaches carrying 12 players due to COVID deferred. What are you hearing about them getting down to 8 players by 2024? Do you think they will keep 12 players again? That's going to be a really tough one. What is happening right now with some of the coaches that are dealing with like players that are on their campus or deciding whether or not they'll keep them and maybe getting back to that original roster size is, and this is where it's hurting recruits, is a lot of coaches are recruiting through the transfer portal, which is something that exists for current college athletes only. So the transfer portal is something that somebody that is at a school would be able to say, okay, I don't like it here anymore, or I want to use my extra year somewhere else to maybe start graduate school or something like that. And a college coach would say, okay, well, I have either this recruit who's in high school or this one kid that I could have for 1 year. You know, I might just go with the kid that I know has done, or player that has done all these things in college. Yeah, and then some of that, like if you're asking about players, like roster sizes getting down to 8, and then those are going to be really like dependent on the university and the athletic department policies. Yeah, so that's where it'd be good to ask with the schools that you're looking at specifically what their roster limits are, or you know what they're thinking in terms of how many players they're bringing in for the class of 2024. Usually they'll be honest with you and they'll tell you that. And of course that can change, but usually what they tell you is accurate if you think they're being honest with you. Should you expect an email back or any communication at all before the June 15th date? It depends on how, so one thing that coaches can do, Division 1 and 2 coaches are the ones that have this rule. They can communicate with your swing coach or somebody like me, so they can directly communicate with people like us. They can't talk to your parents because that would be against the rules too. But they could also send you a questionnaire. So if a coach sends you a questionnaire, you should always fill it out. And that usually puts you on like a camp list or any other sort of information that they can send out when it's like legal to do so. You should always do that. I had a coach tell me that it's one of their like first tests is like, okay, if we send you this questionnaire, how interested are you? If you are going to send us back within a few days, that tells us something. If you don't send it back, that tells us something too, that you can't just follow like the easiest of tasks. And then if we never hear back from you again, like then that clearly shows that we're not interested. This question is talking about a specific school. If a program is still self-funded, like blank, is it still 3.5 scholarships only? That's talking about a specific school and a certain scholarship number. You would want to ask the coaching staff, but I would probably not ask the coaching staff unless you had a good relationship with them. Like I wouldn't have that be your first question. I will say at a school where I was the head coach, we were not fully funded either. And I was always really personally offended when people like would point that out. Like it was like a failing of mine. It's like, I had nothing to do with it. I'm trying to get more. So I would just be like really mindful of how you ask that. What if we were just sending emails and I'm graduating in May, next May, is that okay? Will coaches still consider you're graduating next May? So does that mean that you are a 2023? Will coaches, yes, still consider as long as we send. So for you as a 2023, coaches have no rules. So you're already past that deadline. So you can be communicating with them as much or as little as you would like at this stage. Will coaches still consider as long as we send over? Oh, you're saying, will they be like focusing on the 2024 class? Well, right now, I mean, they're like still probably very seriously looking at 2023. So for the 2023s, this is a really big summer for you. So I would, if you are feeling like you're not getting a lot of communication back, I would revisit your list, and just look at maybe schools that are outside of maybe like the top schools that you were looking at, and look at schools. And hopefully from this presentation, you saw that like across Division I golf, really across like the top 200 programs, it's incredibly competitive. And even in the 200 to 250 range, those programs are still going to be hard to find a spot. So with Division I, so I would look outside of maybe the range of schools you were looking at initially, and reach out to those types of programs, because sometimes if you're reaching out to programs that are like basically too good relative to where you are currently, they might just not consider you until you start shooting like really, really good scores, which might never ever happen. But you might end up having better scholarship opportunities at schools that are maybe a little bit lower than the ones you've been looking at. I'm a 2025 and trying to be proactive in sending schools. I'm interested in a letter and resume. Is this a good start to get on coaches' radars and get recruited in the future? Yes, that's great. You always want to, what I would suggest is, I'm assuming letter is an email. What I suggest for 2025s at this stage is like right now sending, maybe not quite right now because they're about like in their conference championships. So they're like really busy, especially the teams that will make it through the end of May. So it's like the top programs at all levels will have their like national championships and regionals and stuff like that in May. So maybe a little bit, and maybe either during a break when they're not like traveling on the golf course at the national championship, maybe like between regionals and nationals in like mid-May, or depending on, just finding a good time, looking at their schedules online to see, like I always tell my students, especially, like, don't send them an email when they're in the middle of a 36-hole day. Like it just shows that you're not paying attention. Just kind of be mindful of like when their team is competing, because that's always top of mind for them. Even though recruiting is incredibly important and a lot of them know how important it is, like what's happening immediately on campus, because they only get like 24 competition days during the season, and then during the postseason it's probably only like 9 days, maybe 9 to 12 days. So like they're just some of the most important days of their year. So avoid those days. And send a really nice email that's I tailor it really nicely for the school, and maybe say something nice about the coach and what they've achieved. And give them your schedule, give them your summer schedule, because your summer schedule, they might be planning on going to some of those tournaments, and they're already going to be watching kids in the classes ahead of you, but they're going to file if they're organized, which most coaches are decently organized. I would suggest doing this all virtually so that like they can always pull it up on their phone, because every coach lives on their phone these days, unless they're like really, really old. So like choose your audience wisely. If it's like maybe somebody that might be is like a little older, you might want to send them a letter, but most coaches are living on their phones. So send them something digitally, send them a nice email, send them a good resume, send them a schedule. And like I wouldn't, if you're 2025, I wouldn't be super proactive about sending updates all the time, but this coming like fall is when a lot of those coaches likely are going to start focusing on that, your class. Not everybody, but for all of the kids that I've had in the last few years, like typically kind of like what you achieve freshman year is like they're kind of passive following along, but and I'll hear from coaches a little bit about some of my freshmen, but typically like once they start sophomore year is when I start like hearing from coaches proactively, like, hey, tell us more about this student. What are they doing? What is their schedule this fall? Like, stuff like that. They attend one of the tournaments I'm playing. Will they approach me, or will I know they are there? Sometimes you won't. Sometimes you'll be disappointed to hear that they were there and you didn't see them, so they can say didn't follow your group. But this is where it's good to be proactive and sending updates. And sometimes you might see a coach. If a coach is there and you're there, like, and there's nobody talking to them, especially for you right now as of 2023, you can talk to them. They're not supposed to talk to you in the middle of competition, so they probably won't want to talk to you if you're like between holes or if you're about to tee off. But if the day is over, you can talk to them. I always was so impressed with the players that, you know, they knew like I couldn't talk to them very much, but they would come up and say, hi, you know, nice to meet you. My name's Jacqueline. You know, like I was so impressed because I knew that took a lot of guts for them to do that. So I would definitely suggest if you see a coach and it's somebody that maybe you've already communicated with, I would go up and introduce yourself and you know, just tell them that you hope they have a great day. Yes, well, thank you, everybody. I have to go. Thank you so much for all the great questions. I hope your recruiting goes well. Yes, Mikey, I will send this out. I'll put it up on YouTube. I actually have a few other recordings there too. So just create a YouTube channel, no big deal. Yes, I hope you have a wonderful recruitment and good luck to you all this summer. I know it's an exciting summer and an important summer for all of you. So I'll be cheering you on remotely and maybe in person. And oh, hi, Patrick. Thank you. Hope you're doing well. Good luck to you all the rest of the way.